The NTSB has now released a second-by-second timeline of the final moments before the LaGuardia runway collision. And when you slow it down, you start to see how everything tragically lined up in just the last few seconds before impact. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken. I'm traveling on the road, as you can see. Today we have new information from the NTSB's first full day on the scene, including what they've been able to pull from the cockpit voice recorder. And this gives us our clearest look yet at how this all unfolded. Now, as always, everything you're about to hear is preliminary and subject to change, but the timeline they released is detailed enough that we can start to understand the sequence. The recorders themselves were recovered and sent to Washington, D.C. for analysis. The cockpit voice recorder has more than 25 hours of audio across 4 channels, so it's in great shape. And the flight data recorder has about 80 hours of data, so no problems there either. But what they walked through on March 24th press briefing is just the final 3 minutes of the CVR recording. We're going to go through it with a countdown to when it stopped recording.
The following is a summary of events captured on the cockpit voice recorder during the final 3 minutes of the recording. All times are referenced to the end of the CVR recording, 3 minutes and 7 seconds prior to the end of the recording. The approach controller instructed the airplane to contact LaGuardia Tower.
At 2 minutes and 45 seconds, the crew lowers the landing gear. 28 seconds later, they're cleared to land, and we're told they're number 2 for landing.
At 2 minutes and 22 seconds, the flight crew checked in with the LaGuardia Tower. At 2 minutes and 17 seconds, the LaGuardia Tower cleared the airplane to land on runway 4 and advised that they were number 2 for landing.
From there, everything continues normally. Flaps are set, checklists are completed, and at 500 feet, the crew confirms they're on a stable approach. Then, just over a minute before the end, a transmission comes in from an airport vehicle, but it's stepped on by another transmission, meaning it overlapped. Investigators still don't know who made that call.
At 1 minute and 3 seconds, an airport vehicle made a radio transmission to the tower, but that transmission was stepped on by another radio transmission, and the source of who made that transmission has yet to be identified.
From here, everything compresses quickly. At 40 seconds before the end of the recording, the tower asks which vehicle needs to cross the runway.
Emergency vehicles calling on ground, or are you calling on tower?
At 25 seconds, the leading emergency vehicle, Truck 1, requests to cross the runway while driving on a taxiway, and the tower clears him to cross.
At 25 seconds, Truck 1 requested to cross runway 4 at taxiway Delta.
Truck 1 and Company, LaGuardia Tower.
Truck 1 and Company.
Truck 1 and Company, LaGuardia Tower, requesting to cross 4 at Delta.
At 20 seconds, the tower cleared Truck 1 and Company to cross runway 4 at taxiway Delta.
Truck 1 and Company, cross 4 at Delta.
At 17 seconds, the truck reads back that clearance.
Truck 1 and Company, crossing 4 at Delta.
At the same time, the aircraft is descending through the final callouts, 100 feet, 50, 30, 20, 10, and then at 9 seconds before the end of the recording, the tower tells the truck to stop.
At 9 seconds, the tower instructed Truck 1 to stop.
Stop, Truck 1, stop.
At 8 seconds, there was a sound consistent with the airplane's landing gear touching down on the runway.
At 6 seconds, control is transferred from the first officer to the captain. Now, this is a normal procedure. Don't let that fool you into thinking this was abnormal. It was a smoking gun. The steering of the aircraft on the taxiway is on the captain's side. It's called a tiller. It is pretty standard procedure for the captain to take over after a certain speed is reached in the deceleration on the runway. So for instance, at 60 knots, that may be the company policy where the controls automatically go from the first officer to the captain when they're landing. At 4 seconds, the tower again tells the truck to stop.
Stop, Truck 1, stop. Stop, Truck 1, stop.
And then the recording ends. The plane collided with the fire truck, tragically claiming the lives of the two pilots and injuring the firefighters, multiple passengers from the impact, and even a flight attendant who was ejected while in the jump seat. And more on that in a moment. Now, why was the fire truck crossing the runway? Well, the NTSB reported that multiple fire rescue vehicles were responding to another aircraft, United Flight 2384, after reports of fumes or a smell in the cabin. Truck 1 was the first in line in that response.
We do know that they were responding to a United Airlines Flight 2384 at the gate, which had 2 aborted takeoffs, and the ARF, or the Aircraft Rescue and Firefighters, had received information that there were fumes or a smoke or some sort of smell in the cabin, so they were en route to address that.
Ground Unit 2384 is declaring an emergency. Flight attendants in the back are feeling ill. Because of the odor, we will need to go into any available gate at this time.
Okay, roger that. And the fire trucks are over there. They're going to bring a stair truck just in case you guys do want to evacuate. Let me know if you do.
Copy. We'd prefer to wait on a gate, but I mean, again, we only got so much time here because there's still a bit of an odor in the back of the airplane.
Investigators also confirmed that the airport's surface detection system, the ASDE-X, did not generate an alert.
The analysis, and I'm going to quote the analysis here, ASDE-X did not generate an alert due to the close proximity of vehicles merging and unmerging near the runway, resulting in the inability to create a track of high confidence.
Now, ASDE-X is more than just a radar. It's a system that combines multiple sources of data to give the controller a good picture of what's going on the ground at his or her airport. It pulls from surface radar, transponders on aircraft, and in some cases ASDE-B, and then fuses that information together to create a real-time map of everything moving on the airport, the aircraft and the vehicles. On the controller's screen, that shows up as individual targets with identity and position so that they can see exactly what's moving and where. This is especially beneficial in deteriorating weather conditions where the visibility is really lowered. If the system detects that 2 targets are on a path that could create a runway conflict, it can generate an alert. But that depends on the system being able to clearly track each target. In this case, investigators say the vehicles were moving in close proximity, merging and separating near the runway, which made it difficult for the system to build what they call a high-confidence track. So instead of clearly defined targets, what they described seeing were essentially overlapping returns, what looks like 2 blobs. Rather than distinct vehicles, the system could reliably track. And without that level of confidence, the system doesn't trigger an alert, which means in this case that layer of protection simply wasn't there. And that shifts the focus back to one of the biggest questions surrounding this crash. What was happening inside the tower? How many people were working there? While there is more information to be verified by the NTSB, they have found out that there were 2 controllers on duty with roles that were combined, which is standard for overnight operations. However, even with that information, it's still unclear who was handling ground, who was handling local at that moment.
We do, however, know that there were 2 people in the cab, 2 people in the tower cab at the time of collision. The local controller and the controller in charge. Again, local controller and controller in charge. For those who may be watching and aren't familiar with aviation, the local controller manages active runways and the immediate airspace surrounding the airport. The controller in charge is responsible for safety of operations, all safety of operations. The controller in charge was also doing the duties of the clearance delivery position. The clearance delivery controller provides pilots with their departure clearance. It is not clear who was conducting the duties of the ground controller. We have conflicting information. We have some information saying it was the controller in charge, we have some information saying it was the local controller. The ground controller duties are that they manage all aircraft and vehicle movements on the taxiways, and that generally excludes active runways.
The NTSB planned on interviewing the controllers after the briefing, so hopefully more information on that comes out soon. They will be questioning the controllers that were present at the shift prior as well. Before moving on, I want to address a question I know some people are already asking. How can there be just 2 controllers at a busy airport like LaGuardia? Why would you combine those positions? Overnight is actually standard for airports to operate with fewer controllers on duty, and that's because traffic levels are significantly lower compared to daytime operations. Traffic levels determine how many controllers. So instead of having separate controllers for each position, like ground, tower, clearance delivery, those roles are often combined. And that means 1 or 2 controllers may be handling multiple responsibilities at the same time. And while that might sound surprising at a place like LaGuardia, this isn't unique. It's common practice across the national airspace system during late night operations.
So these 2 positions were combined into 2 positions. And what we do know is that that is in the standard operating procedures for LaGuardia. It's for the midnight shift. It's also common practice across the national airspace where you would have 2 controllers in the tower cab during the midnight shift.
Perhaps this crash might change the way standard operating procedures at larger airports like LaGuardia, but we won't know until the NTSB finishes their investigation and provides their recommendations. Now, one thing the NTSB made very clear in the March 24th briefing is that it's too early to point blame.
Now, I do want to address one thing, which is reports of distraction. I have seen a number of reports from press about distraction, whether there was distraction among controllers. Look, I would caution pointing fingers at controllers and saying distraction was involved. This is a heavy workload environment.
Because in aviation, it's almost never just one thing.
So one thing I will close with before I take questions is we rarely, if ever, investigate a major accident where it was one failure. Our aviation system is incredibly safe because there are multiple layers of defense built in to prevent an accident. So when something goes wrong, that means many, many things went wrong. And so here, that's why we're here. We're here to prevent this from reoccurring, prevent this from happening again. And that's going to take some time.
And that's where this stands right now. At the center of this are the 2 pilots who lost their lives, along with others who were injured, and the families that are now dealing with the aftermath of this crash. They will all be in our thoughts and prayers. And I mentioned the flight attendant earlier, and there has been an update on her condition after being ejected in her seat from the aircraft. Her daughter confirmed she suffered multiple fractures and would need surgery for her broken leg, but her life is not in danger. She added, "It's a miracle, and it could have been so much worse." Yes, it could have been so much worse, and it is indeed a miracle. We'll continue to follow the story, provide you any updates as more information becomes available. On a personal note, this is a horrible tragedy on several levels. First of all, the families of those pilots, I can't imagine their grief. And secondly, the controller and the truck driver, they didn't want this to happen. I can't imagine what they are going through. And we don't know yet what the cause is, and we need to wait for the investigation. But it's a reminder for me of how easy it is for a simple mistake to happen that can cost everything. It's why I have to be always on my toes, dotting the I's, crossing the T's. I cannot let myself get complacent. That's the report. If you want to see one of our earlier reports, check it out over here somewhere. Thank you for watching, and remember, superior judgment trumps superior skill. Take care.